The void whispered promises of peace, but Admiral Jacob Price knew it spoke with a silver tongue. For 3 months, humanity had held its breath, knowing the universe was watching, waiting, and judging. Then, they arrived. Not as saviors, but as architects of a gilded cage. 7 massive vessels, shimmering alien titans, burst from faster-than-light travel, an intentional display of power meant to awe and intimidate. Ambassador Velar, a reptilian lord of scale and cunning, led his delegation through the airlock, 6 other species trailing behind him, each more exotic, more ancient, than the last. Linda Hayes, Earth's chief diplomat, met them with a smile that was a masterpiece of human defiance, polite, professional, and utterly unyielding beneath its surface. Nothing truly prepared you for the sheer, suffocating weight of galactic antiquity. In a conference room engineered for countless physiologies, Velar spoke through a translator, his sibilant words a balm of patronizing generosity. The Galactic Council had observed humanity, he explained. Our triumphs, our wars, our first tentative steps into the stars. Now, with faster-than-light travel, it was time to join their vast, ancient community. The terms? Limited citizenship, restricted trade zones, approved colony worlds. In exchange, humanity would accept limits on military expansion, resource extraction, and technological development. Admiral Price felt a cold, familiar rage tighten his jaw. He'd spent 30 years fighting for human freedom, watching Earth claw its way from warring factions to a fragile unity. He knew subjugation when he saw it, no matter how sweetly it was sugar-coated. These generous terms were a collar, a leash designed to keep humanity a perpetual child amongst the stars. Linda Hayes, however, was a master of the dance. She asked careful questions, probing the limits of their offer, revealing nothing of Earth's iron resolve. 4 hours later, the delegation returned to their ships, supremely confident humanity would embrace its new, lesser place. They had no idea what they had just awakened. Captain Ryan Mitchell, his blood humming with the aggressive pulse of humanity's nascent space navy, knew their generosity was a lie. His scout ship, the ESS Horizon, pushed experimental sensors to their limits. 3 days after first contact, he found the truth. A Kryn mining platform, a monstrous parasitic growth, already burrowing into Europa, our moon. Mitchell's challenge blared across all frequencies: identify yourselves, cease operations in human territory. The reply came from a Kryn commander, Sharptooth, his voice laced with undisguised contempt. The council had been here for millennia, he hissed. Europa was theirs by salvage rights. Humans were primitives, barely out of their caves, lucky they were only taking ice, not the whole planet. Mitchell recorded every sneering word. It wasn't just an insult, it was a cosmic slap to humanity's collective face, a profound underestimation of what we considered ours. He sent it home, a silent promise of retribution. Deep beneath the Pentagon, Kelly Barnes, an intelligence analyst with an unnerving ability to see patterns others missed, felt the grim truth solidify. Reports poured in, council ships mapping asteroid belts, probes scanning Earth's defenses, commercial vessels testing human response times. Each incident, isolated, could be dismissed. Together, they painted a chilling mosaic. The council wasn't offering guidance, they were probing for weakness, preparing for the next phase of their long-played game. Her report, alongside Mitchell's furious recording, landed on President Richard Stone's desk like twin thunderbolts. Stone, a leader forged in the fires of a unified Earth, didn't hesitate. He called an emergency session of the Coalition Parliament. In Geneva, the chamber crackled with nervous energy. Stone played Mitchell's recording, letting the contempt in Sharptooth's voice fuel their outrage. Then, Kelly's data, the methodical, insidious encroachment. General Frank Morrison, a grizzled veteran whose eyes had seen too much human blood, rose to speak. He had warned them. Now, his military assessment confirmed their worst fears: accept the terms, and humanity would be a permanent subordinate, our military neutered, our expansion stifled, our technology controlled. Every species that had swallowed this bitter pill was now a perpetual junior, utterly dependent. The debate raged for 6 hours. Voices of fear, caution, and pragmatism clashed with a deeper, more ancient human instinct: defiance. Surrender now, and doom future generations? Or face the consequences, head held high? President Stone listened to every argument, then called for a vote. It wasn't unanimous, but it was clear. Earth would not accept. They would make a counteroffer, a declaration of equal standing. If the Council refused, humanity would face the storm with clear consciences and ready weapons. Commander Nina Scott, humanities historian, had spent weeks sifting through the Council's public records. What she found was more terrifying than any military threat: a galactic graveyard of civilizations. Species that integrated thrived, growing wealthy but impotent. Species that refused? Isolation, trade embargoes, economic strangulation. A few stubborn holdouts faced mysterious accidents, internal rebellions, or unpreventable pirate raids. Ultimately, they vanished. Price knew. The Council's diplomacy was a calculated opening move in a game they'd played for millennia. Refusal meant pressure, then conflict, then submission or oblivion. But Price also knew something the Council didn't. For a year, since the first faint echoes of alien observation, humanity had been preparing. Hidden shipyards, buried in asteroid belts, veiled on Saturn's moons, even beyond Pluto and the Kuiper Belt. While the Council assumed humanity was debating its gilded chains, we were forging swords. Operation Prometheus was activated. The cloaks of stealth technology, humanity's own breakthrough, fell away. Thousands of warships, not as large as the alien behemoths, but swift, agile, and armed with weapons designed by a species that had perfected the art of killing each other for millennia, burst forth. Admiral Price watched his nascent fleet assemble on the tactical display. The next few days would not just determine humanity's future, they would etch our name into the very fabric of the cosmos, as either slaves or free. The Coalition Parliament chamber in Geneva fell silent. President Richard Stone entered, a tablet holding humanity's audacious counter-proposal. This wasn't just a political decision, it was a soul-searching declaration of intent. General Frank Morrison, old but unbowed, hammered home the truth: the Council's terms were a carefully constructed cage. He showed charts, graphs, and projections. Every species that had joined remained exactly where they started, grateful subjects. Linda Hayes, after days of futile conversation with Ambassador Wheeler, confirmed the Council's inflexibility. The restrictions are not punishments, he'd purred, but protections. When she'd asked what would happen if Earth declined, Wheeler's casual certainty had been chilling: no species declines the Council's invitation. It simply doesn't happen. Henry Clark, Earth's senior negotiator, a man who had forged peace from centuries of human hatred, presented humanity's counteroffer. It was a diplomatic gauntlet thrown: full sovereignty, complete military control, a seat on the Council with full voting rights. Not an observer, but an equal. The vote came at midnight. 240 nations, once rivals, now united. Overwhelmingly, they roared their defiance. Earth would not accept subordination. Stone authorized the transmission of their audacious counter-proposal. Then, he gave the order. The second part of humanity's response. Admiral Price had been waiting. Operation Prometheus surged into its next phase with devastating precision. Colonel Dean Foster's asteroid belt shipyards, miracles of stealth technology, dissolved their cloaks. Hundreds of warships, a silent armada, ignited their engines, taking up positions throughout the Sol system. Within minutes, the Council delegation detected them. Wheeler, his composure finally cracking, demanded an explanation. Lieutenant Sarah Morgan, spokesperson for the Earth Defense Coalition, delivered humanity's answer. Her voice, calm and unyielding, broadcast across all frequencies, a cosmic declaration: Earth claims sovereignty over the Sol system and all its resources. Any attempt to enforce Council authority would be an act of war. The fleet now surrounding their positions was proof humanity could defend its territory. The choice was simple: recognize Earth's independence, or leave. 12 hours later, Wheeler's reply came, tinged with what might have been genuine regret. The Council was disappointed by humanity's hostility, concerned by their aggressive military buildup. A fleet would arrive in 1 week, he promised, to demonstrate the consequences of defying Council guidance. He had hoped humanity would be wiser. Admiral Price listened, then began final preparations for war. The next 7 days were a blur of furious, desperate invention. Captain Danny Brooks, commanding the Mars Orbital Defense Group, drilled his 40 ships mercilessly. He knew the council fought like chess masters, according to rules. Brooks had learned war from humanity's bloody, messy history, where rules were suggestions and survival demanded constant, brutal innovation. Lieutenant Commander Amy Price, Admiral Price's daughter but a warrior in her own right, specialized in missile systems. Council shields shrugged off energy weapons. So, Amy engineered kinetic missiles, designed to smash through alien defenses with raw, brutal force. Her weapons, humanity's answer to elegant energy, were loaded onto every ship. Tactical Officer Chris Bennett, a maverick, pushed a radical idea: the Council had outlawed kinetic bombardment centuries ago. That meant their ships were probably vulnerable to it. He convinced his superiors to equip several ships with magnetic accelerators, crude electromagnets capable of flinging asteroid fragments at relativistic speeds. A rock, moving at a fraction of light speed, carried more destructive power than most missiles. It was barbaric. It was human. Engineer Patricia Cole, locked in a laboratory deep beneath Colorado, raced against time. She was weaponizing quantum entanglement. If she could make linked particles destabilize inside a council ship, bypassing their shields, their vessels might simply tear themselves apart. The science was sound, but terrifyingly untested. She had 6 days. On the 5th day, President Stone addressed Earth. His face, etched with grim determination, filled every screen. A hostile fleet was coming. Humanity would fight. The cost would be high: rationing, casualties, the very real possibility of annihilation. But he reminded them why freedom was worth defending. The right to chart their own destiny among the stars was worth any sacrifice. His words, translated into every language, echoed with defiant resolve. The Council fleet arrived exactly as promised. 200 warships, a glittering wall of alien arrogance, materialized at the edge of the system. Admiral Krell, on his massive dreadnought, the Pride of Vaxxon, transmitted a final demand for surrender. Admiral Price's reply was a single, defiant word: no. The Battle of Mars began. Krell saw numbers: 200 against 40. A mathematical certainty of victory. His tactical computers churned, calculating firing solutions for a rout. Brooks, however, saw something else. He watched the Council fleet approach in their textbook, impenetrable formation, a relic of predictable warfare. He smiled. He wasn't playing chess, he was fighting for humanity's soul. Amy Price launched the opening salvo. Missiles, not a neat, orderly volley, but waves of coordinated, adaptive death. The first went straight, forcing point defense. The second curved, accelerating around the flanks. The third did something the Council had never encountered: the missiles linked in flight, sharing targeting data, adjusting their trajectories in real time. Krell's ships, precise and powerful, shot down most, but 17 slammed into Council shields. The shields held, just as Amy knew they would. But the impacts forced them to divert power, drawing from weapons and engines. Brooks saw the power fluctuations. Phase 2. His fleet shattered its formation, a suicidal dance that left Krell sputtering in confusion. Human ships, smaller and faster, accelerated in seemingly random directions, impossible to track, impossible to target. Krell tried to maintain his perfect formation, but the humans were already executing maneuvers that defied his millennia of military doctrine. Then, the hammer roared. Tactical Officer Chris Bennett, on a ship built around a single, monstrous weapon, launched a chunk of nickel-iron asteroid. A simple rock, 10,000 tons of space debris. But Bennett's magnetic accelerator flung it forward at velocities that defied belief. The fragment crossed the distance in seconds. Krell's flagship, the Pride of Vaxxon, took the impact head-on. The kinetic energy of a mountain moving at a whisper of light speed overwhelmed the energy barriers designed to stop lasers and plasma. Shields collapsed. The asteroid punched through the hull like paper. Krell's dreadnought shuddered, atmosphere screaming into the void, a hole 300 meters wide gaping where its forward sections had been. His bridge crew was gone. The Council fleet reacted with the confusion of soldiers who had never faced such primal brutality. Energy weapons were civilized. Hurling rocks was barbarism. But humanity was doing it anyway. 3 more Council ships took devastating hits before captains scrambled to avoid the kinetic bombardment. That maneuver, born of terror, opened gaping holes in their perfect formation. Brooks, humanity's tactical shark, exploited them instantly. Human ships dove through, faster and more maneuverable, getting inside the Council formation where the alien behemoths couldn't bring their main guns to bear. Lieutenant Sarah Morgan, commanding the EDS Swift, danced between Council vessels, firing point-blank into their weakest points, sections she knew intimately from Council schematics proudly shared during their diplomatic charade. Admiral Price watched from Earth orbit, a silent sentinel. Brooks had complete authority. Human ships were taking damage, shields failing, lives being lost. The EDS Defiant exploded. The EDS Ranger drifted, helpless. But for every human vessel lost, the Council lost 2 or 3. An exchange ratio that should have been impossible. Commander Nina Scott, monitoring Council communications, heard the alien officers' voices, confusion, anger, then raw, dawning terror. They had expected an easy victory over primitives. Instead, they were fighting a desperate battle against an enemy who refused to follow any rules of civilized warfare. Some captains pleaded for withdrawal. Krell, still commanding from his shattered flagship, ordered them to hold. The turning point came when Patricia Cole's quantum disruptors entered the fray. 3 prototypes, untested, mounted on humanity's fastest ships. Lieutenant Kevin Walsh made the first attack run, screaming toward a Council cruiser, weapons fire tearing his ship apart. His shields failed, his hull breached, but he got close enough. He launched the disruptor. It passed through the Council ship's shields as if they didn't exist. For a moment, nothing. Then, the cruiser began to shake. Explosions ripped across its surface. Quantum destabilization spread. Molecular bonds broke. Atoms tore apart. Within 30 seconds, the massive vessel was a cloud of superheated gas and twisted metal. The Council fleet saw one of their own ships unmade by an unknown weapon, a horror beyond their comprehension. The panic that had been building finally broke. Krell, shattered and shamed, gave the order to retreat. 47 ships lost, 32 crippled. Humanity, down to 22 operational vessels, still fought with the same ferocity. The Council forces withdrew, their superior speed and FTL allowing them to escape. Humans held the field, surrounded by debris and the echoes of their defiant roar. Earth erupted in spontaneous, joyous celebration. President Stone addressed the planet, praising the heroes, mourning the fallen, but warning them, this was just the beginning. The Council would not accept defeat from a species they considered inferior. A larger fleet would come. And next time, they would be prepared for human tactics. Admiral Price knew Stone was right. They had won a battle, but the war for their very existence had just begun. High Chancellor Zixter convened the Galactic Council in emergency session. The chamber, a monument to 5 millennia of stability, now buzzed with something alien to their ancient order, uncertainty. Ambassador Wheeler, his reputation in tatters, delivered his report. Humanity was not just resistant, they were potentially the most dangerous species encountered in a millennium. They fought without rules, embraced technological innovation with terrifying speed, and possessed a will to defy that bordered on madness. Admiral Krell, his body healing but his pride shattered, appeared via hologram. He argued for immediate, overwhelming retaliation. The Council's reputation demanded it. If humanity was allowed to defy them, other species might question their own subordinate positions. 500 warships, Krell proposed, enough to sterilize Earth. The debate raged. Some supported Krell. Others called for a blockade, waiting for the primitives to exhaust themselves. A few, mostly from younger species, dared to whisper, what if humanity should be treated as equals? Those voices were quickly silenced by the ancient, complacent powers. After 12 hours, Zixter called for a vote. An overwhelming majority. A second fleet would be assembled. Total victory. Krell, still haunted by the relativistic rock that had torn his pride apart, was given overall command. He would not fail again. The month Earth had to prepare passed in a blur of desperate, furious activity. Admiral Jacob Price orchestrated the largest military mobilization in human history. General Lisa Campbell turned the orbital space around Earth and Mars into a death trap, bristling with next-generation quantum disruptors and conventional weapons designed to overwhelm the Council's newly adapted shields. Captain Roger Bennett led the Deep Space Interceptor wings, pushing humanity's experimental engines to their limits. His pilots knew they were flying to their deaths, but not without taking a piece of the enemy with them. Commander Steve Harris volunteered for what everyone understood was a suicide mission. Fueled by a raw, primal grief for his family, lost in a Kryn raid, he would lead a squadron of ships, laden with fusion warheads, directly into the heart of the Council fleet. Patricia Cole, humanity's mad genius, refined her quantum disruptors, making them more reliable, giving them greater range, mass-producing them in secret factories. She also created countermeasures, shield improvements and hull armor that might give human ships a few more seconds of survival. In war, seconds were eternity. The Council fleet arrived precisely 4 weeks later. 517 warships, an impossible armada, materialized at multiple points around the Sol system, surrounding Earth's territory. Admiral Krell, on his new flagship, the Judgment of Vaxxon, transmitted his ultimatum: surrender now, or watch your civilization burn. Admiral Price, on the bridge of the EDS Victory, humanity's first true battleship, stood tall. His message, broadcast to every human ship, was brief, unwavering: the Council expects to crush a primitive species. We will teach them humanity has been fighting and surviving since before their civilizations existed. There will be no surrender. No retreat. Fight until destroyed, or victorious. The Second Battle of Sol began. General Lisa Campbell's orbital platforms erupted, spitting quantum fire. Some disruptors found their mark, tearing alien ships apart. Others were countered by the Council's improved defenses, but the casualties mounted. Roger Bennett's interceptor wings hit the Council fleet like a swarm of angry hornets, darting from behind asteroids and moons, striking at vulnerable points. His pilots died by the dozens, but they kept coming, a relentless, suicidal whirlwind, bleeding the enemy ship by ship. Then, Commander Steve Harris made his run. His squadron of 20 ships, a furious, suicidal arrow, accelerated directly toward Krell's flagship. Council ships fired everything they had. Harris's vessel took hit after hit, shields failing, hull breached, but it kept accelerating. His crew abandoned ship and life pods, leaving Harris alone, guiding his dying vessel on its final, glorious course. The collision was spectacular and terrible. Harris's ship, a fusion of defiance and devastation, impacted the Judgment of Vaxxon's shields. The quantum disruptors tore holes in the energy barriers, then the fusion warheads detonated, a miniature star blooming in the void. Krell's flagship survived, but just barely. Its forward sections melted into slag, its once proud form a ruin. The Council fleet reeled. These humans didn't just resist, they attacked with a ferocity bordering on madness. Ships, gravely damaged, refused to retreat. Instead, they rammed Council vessels, or self-destructed near enemy formations. Human crews fought on, even as their ships broke apart around them. The battle raged for 3 days. Human crews fought in shifts, pushed past every limit of endurance. Council forces had the numbers and firepower, but humanity refused to fight by predictable rules. Danny Brooks turned Earth's moon into an unyielding fortress, launching desperate counterattacks that destroyed 11 Council vessels for half his own fleet. Sarah Morgan, commander of a small flotilla defending the Mars orbital yards, used false sensor readings and decoy drones to make her meager force appear like a vast, unassailable legion. Council captains learned to approach her sector with caution, after 3 of their ships were ambushed and destroyed by phantom fire. Krell watched his second fleet suffer losses that would have been unthinkable. Over 200 ships gone. Human losses were proportionally higher, but they seemed to replenish them faster. Hidden yards, deep within the system, kept churning out new warships, each incorporating lessons learned in real time. Humans were adapting, evolving, becoming more dangerous with every engagement. It was something Krell had never encountered in 3 millennia. On the 3rd day, Admiral Jacob Price made his final, terrifying decision. His fleet was at 40% strength, ammunition, and fuel critically low. Earth's orbital defenses were all but gone. Another week, and they would collapse. But Price had one card left. A weapon so dangerous, its use risked everything. He transmitted orders to Colonel Dean Foster, then opened a channel to Admiral Krell. Their conversation was brief, formal, almost respectful. Price informed Krell that humanity had developed weapons capable of destroying planets. Several Council worlds were already targeted by missiles, now in flight. They would reach their destinations in 6 days. Only Price could transmit the abort codes. If the Council fleet did not withdraw immediately, those worlds would become radioactive debris. Mutually assured destruction. If Earth fell, the Council would pay a price that would echo through their civilization for generations. Krell didn't believe it. No species would be so insane. Then his sensors detected them. Massive projectiles, traveling through faster-than-light corridors, toward 3 different Council homeworlds. The trajectories were correct. The weapons were real. Billions would die. Krell faced a decision no Council admiral had ever confronted: accept defeat from an inferior species, or risk the destruction of the very civilizations he was sworn to protect. The debate within the Council fleet was immediate, furious. Some cried bluff. Others pointed to humanity's barbaric tactics: kinetic bombardment, suicide attacks, quantum weapons. Planet killers were tragically consistent with everything humanity had shown so far. Admiral Krell consulted High Chancellor Zixter. Long-range sensors confirmed it. The threat was genuine. Zixter convened another emergency session, the chamber on Zentera Prime now filled with shouting, accusations, and raw, primal fear. How had primitives developed such weapons? Could they negotiate with terrorists? But underneath it all, the chilling realization: if humanity was willing to destroy Council worlds once, what would stop them from doing it again? The balance of power, undisturbed for millennia, was crumbling. The decision came down to cold mathematics and brutal political reality: 3 Council worlds, 14 billion lives, against the principle of never surrendering to younger species. The vote to withdraw the fleet and open negotiations was agonizing. It passed by a narrow margin. Orders were transmitted to Admiral Krell: cease hostilities. Pull back. The guns fell silent. Crews, fighting for 3 days straight, collapsed at their stations, staring in exhausted disbelief. Captain Roger Bennett brought his battered interceptor wing back to base, 60% of his pilots lost, but humanity's future secured. General Lisa Campbell watched from Earth as the Council fleet, still formidable but broken, began its retreat. President Richard Stone authorized Admiral Price to transmit the abort codes. The planet-killing missiles altered course, detonating in empty space, far from any inhabited worlds. Spectacular explosions, a final, terrifying reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. Then, a transmission from High Chancellor Zixter, a request for formal negotiations. The Council was ready to talk. On humanity's terms. The negotiations took place on a neutral station, a crucible where galactic power dynamics were rewritten. Admiral Jacob Price led the human delegation, flanked by Linda Hayes and Patricia Cole. Ambassador Wheeler and his Council team looked upon them with a mixture of awe, resentment, and profound respect. 2 weeks of tense, brutal haggling. The treaty that emerged shocked the galaxy and redefined humanity's place among the stars. Earth gained full sovereignty over the Sol system and any colony worlds they established within their designated expansion zone. The restrictions on human military development were removed entirely. Most significantly, humanity was granted a permanent seat on the Galactic Council itself, with full voting rights and veto power over any resolution that affected their interests. In exchange, humanity agreed to share specific technologies, particularly the quantum disruptors that had so utterly terrified the Council, and to provide tactical training to Council military officers. Ambassador Wheeler signed the treaty, his alien features hinting at a grudging, profound respect. He had begun this process believing humanity were primitives to be guided, controlled. He ended it understanding they were something the galaxy had never seen, a species that combined relentless technological innovation with an absolute, unyielding refusal to accept subjugation. The Council had made a critical mistake assuming age meant superiority. Humanity had proven determination and adaptability could overcome even vast differences in resources and technology. 5 years later, Commander Ryan Mitchell stood on the bridge of the EDS Defiance, humanity's first true dreadnought, a marriage of human aggression and council sophistication. His mission: patrol the new border zones, enforcing the rights humanity had won through blood and courage. His crew was mixed, humans working alongside aliens who had once been enemies, now reluctant allies. The galaxy had learned its lesson about humanity, though different species drew different conclusions. Some viewed humans as dangerous barbarians, lucky and destined to self-destruct. Others saw humanity as the catalyst that would finally force the Council to reform its ancient, rigid hierarchies. A few, the truly wise, recognized humans for what they truly were: survivors who had clawed their way up from a violent history, forged in fire, and utterly refused to be pushed back down. The Council, which had once sought to dominate Earth, now looked to human forces for protection against threats the older civilizations had forgotten how to fight. Admiral Jacob Price retired to teach at the New Earth Defense Academy, training the next generation of officers who would safeguard humanity's hard-won freedom. His lectures emphasized innovation, courage, and never accepting that any fight was unwinnable. His students came from every nation on Earth, and increasingly, from allied alien species desperate to learn humanity's brutal, effective tactics. The galaxy was changing, and humanity stood at the center of that change. President Richard Stone addressed the people of Earth on the 5th anniversary of the treaty signing. He spoke of those who had died, the thousands of spacers who had given their lives against impossible odds. He reminded them that freedom was never permanent, that it had to be defended by each generation. But he also celebrated what humanity had accomplished, transforming from a species barely able to reach their own moon to one of the most influential powers in galactic politics, all within a single lifetime. The story of how Earth defied the Galactic Council became legend across hundreds of worlds. Young species, facing their own forced integration, heard about humanity's brutal, defiant response and took courage. The galaxy was less stable than it had been before humans arrived, but it was also more dynamic, more willing to question ancient hierarchies. Humanity had forced the entire galactic community to remember that power came not from age or tradition, but from the unyielding will to fight for what you believed was right. In the end, the Council's attempt to subordinate humanity had created the very thing they feared most: a strong, independent species that refused to play by their rules, and had the military power to enforce its independence. Earth stood as proof that newcomers could challenge the established order and win, if they were willing to pay the price. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity had made certain they would never again be dismissed as primitives who needed guidance from their betters. They had earned their place among the stars through courage, sacrifice, and a response so utterly human, it left the entire Galactic Council speechless.